There is a scroll in the British Museum, 78 feet long, that was smuggled out of Egypt in 1888. Past guards, past a sealed storeroom, through a hole dug under a wall, and the man who arranged all of it worked for the museum itself. It is not a poem, it is not a prayer. It is an instruction manual, step by step, stage by stage, gate by gate. It walks you through the first hours after you die. The Egyptians spent 1,500 years refining this one document, longer than Christianity has owned the Bible. So the question is simple, and nobody has fully answered it. Why would a civilization write a procedure with passwords in the correct order for a journey no living person has ever seen, unless they believed they knew exactly what was waiting on the other side? Start with what this book is not. There is no single Book of the Dead, and the Egyptians never called it that. The name is modern. A German scholar named Carl Richard Lepsius published one copy in 1842, numbered its chapters, and the label stuck. What the Egyptians wrote at the top of the scroll was far stranger. The spells of coming forth by day. Not the book of dying, the book of coming back out. And it was never written once. It was engineered across 15 centuries. Around 2350 BCE, the oldest religious texts on Earth appear, carved inside the pyramid of King Unas. The pyramid texts. Spells for the king and only the king. Centuries later, the same formulas migrate onto the wooden coffins of noblemen. Scholars call those the coffin texts. Death knowledge was sliding down the social ladder. By around 1550 BCE, it becomes a scroll, and anyone with money can own one. Roughly 200 known spells. No two copies identical. You picked your spells the way people pick insurance coverage. Then there is the detail that tells you what the Egyptians really thought they were buying. Workshops produced copies in advance. Fully written, fully illustrated, complete. With one blank space. A gap in the text, waiting for a name. You walked in, you paid. A scribe wrote your name into the gaps, and you owned a guaranteed route through the afterlife. Sit with that for a second. Poetry does not come with a fill-in-the-blank form. This was technology to them. A tested, standardized product, the way you and I buy a fire extinguisher. Not because we enjoy reading about fires, because we quietly believe that one day the thing will have to work. For 1,500 years, from before Abraham would have lived until the age of Cleopatra, scribes kept copying, correcting, and expanding one single document about what happens after the heart stops. Generation after generation. The longest-running research program in human history, pointed at the one event no researcher ever reports back from, which raises an obvious problem. Refined against what? A boat design improves because boats sink or float. What feedback could possibly improve a map of the land of the dead? The Egyptians had an answer. We will get there. First, you need to meet the man whose copy became the most famous one on Earth, and the museum curator who committed an actual crime to get it. In 1888, a man named E.A. Wallace Budge arrived in Luxor with British Museum money and instructions to buy antiquities. Dealers showed him a papyrus, unlike anything on the market. Nearly 24 meters of dense text and vivid color, barely touched by time. It had belonged to a man named Ani, a royal scribe, an accountant of the temple offerings of Thebes, a senior bureaucrat of the 19th dynasty who died around 1250 BCE, in the age of Rameses the Great. His scroll was custom work, top of the line, and it was over 3,000 years old. The Egyptian Antiquities Service found out Budge was buying. They put him under watch, sealed the storehouse where his purchases sat, and posted guards at the door. What happened next we know from Budge himself, because he wrote it down in his memoirs. I have read those pages, and the strangest thing about them is the tone. He is almost proud. While the guards were occupied, men dug beneath the wall of the sealed storehouse. The antiquities went out through the tunnel. The Papyrus of Ani left Egypt, hidden in shipments. Budge routed through military channels, and it arrived in London, where it sits today. Catalogued as Object EA10470. Then the man who saved it mutilated it. To mount the scroll for display, Budge cut a single continuous 3,000-year-old document into 37 separate sheets. Conservators have winced at that decision ever since. But ask the better question. A museum man risks arrest, digs tunnels and smuggles crates past armed guards. For what? There is no gold here, no jewels. It is ink on pressed reeds. What Budge understood, what made this scroll worth a crime, is that the Papyrus of Ani is the most complete surviving edition of the manual. The full route, the names, the map, and the route it describes is no tunnel of light. It is a fortified country. The Egyptians called it the Duat, and according to the text, you cross it the way you cross a border under military control. Checkpoints, credentials, interrogations. Ani's scroll walks him through it in strict order, because order is everything here. First the gates, then the hall, then the scale. 3 filters, and each one eliminates travelers. But before we open the first gate, there is a problem with this whole story that I skipped on purpose. For most of modern history, nobody could read any of this. Not one word. Here is the part that gets left out of every summary. Hieroglyphic writing died around the end of the 4th century CE. The last temples closed. The last priests who could read the old script passed away, and the knowledge simply stopped. The final, dated hieroglyphic inscription we know of was carved at the Temple of Philae in 394 CE. After that, silence. Think about what that means. The scrolls survived, thousands of them sealed in dry tombs, perfectly legible. The manual for the afterlife sat there, intact, for roughly 1,500 years. And the entire human race had lost the ability to read it. Travelers stared at the walls. Medieval scholars decided the symbols were magic pictures, secret wisdom, anything but what they actually were. The book was open. The key was gone. The key came back by accident, through a war. In 1799, soldiers in Napoleon's expedition were reinforcing a fort near the Egyptian town of Rosetta when they pulled a broken slab of dark stone out of the rubble. The same decree, carved 3 times, Greek at the bottom, which scholars could read, hieroglyphs at the top, which nobody could. A bridge between a living language and a dead one. It still took 23 years. The man who finally cracked it was a French linguist named Jean-François Champollion, who had been obsessed with Egypt since childhood. On the 14th of September, 1822, he matched the sounds, ran down the street to his brother's office at the Institute, managed to say something like, "I've got it," and collapsed. He was out for days. That part is documented, and honestly it is my favorite detail in this whole story. The first man in 15 centuries to hear the dead speak fainted from it. Within a generation, scholars were reading the tomb walls and the scrolls. And the texts turned out not to be magic pictures or priestly decoration. They were precise. Names, itineraries, formulas to recite at specific doors. The gatekeepers of the Duat had been standing in the dark for 3,000 years, waiting for someone to say their names again. So when Budge carried Ani's scroll into London 66 years later, the world could finally read what a dead accountant from Thebes had paid so much money to know. And what he paid for, first of all, was a list of doors, 7 of them, each one already expecting him. Spell 144. The text is precise. Between the newly dead and the kingdom of Osiris stand 7 arets, 7 gates, and at every gate, not 1 guardian, 3, a doorkeeper, a watcher, a herald. 21 beings in total, each with a name, each with a single function. To stop you, the names are not reassuring. At the first gate, the doorkeeper's name translates roughly as "he whose face is inverted, the many-shaped." The watcher beside him is called the eavesdropper. Think about that job description for a moment. A being posted at the border of the afterlife, whose entire purpose is to listen to what the dead say. How do you get through? Not by goodness, not by prayer, by information. The dead soul must stop at each gate, declare the secret names of all three beings, and recite the exact formula assigned to that gate. Say the names correctly and the gate opens. Fail, and the text does not bother describing a second attempt. That is the mechanic of the entire book, and it deserves to be said plainly, because it is not how we imagine ancient religion. The Book of the Dead is a password system. Exact, memorized, letter-perfect knowledge is the only currency that works down there. The Egyptians did not send their dead into the Duat, hoping they had been kind people. They sent them in briefed, which finally explains why the scroll goes in the coffin. The Egyptians knew perfectly well that memory dies with the body, so they buried the cheat sheet with the corpse, your personal copy, with your name written into the gaps, lying on your chest like mission documents. Some coffins went further and had the spells painted on the inside of the lid, facing the dead man's eyes. Reading material, positioned for a reader who is expected to wake up. Stop and run the test on yourself. 21 names, under stress, in darkness, in front of the beings the names belong to. How many would you hold on to? The Egyptians asked themselves that exact question, and their answer was none. Nobody remembers 21 names while terrified. You bring the text or you fail. That is not how a culture treats a metaphor. That is how a culture treats a procedure. It is afraid of getting wrong. Gate by gate, the scroll moves Ani forward, and the deeper he goes, the stranger the route becomes. Some editions of the route, spell 146, count not 7 gates but 21 separate portals around the house of Osiris, each with its own armed gatekeeper. The names get worse as you go. She who burns, Lady of Destruction. The numbers vary between editions. The architecture never does. Layered defenses, named guardians, spoken credentials. Whoever designed this cosmology was not picturing a garden. They were describing a security perimeter. So here is the question the whole video turns on. A security perimeter, keeping what out or keeping what in? The text never answers that. What it tells you instead is where the gates lead. And this is where the journey changes character. Because the gates, it turns out, are only the outer wall. They filter out the unprepared, the ones who arrive without the names. Passing them earns you no reward at all. Passing them earns you an interrogation. At the end of the 7th gate, the corridor opens into a hall. The text calls it the Hall of the Two Truths. 42 figures sit inside it in 2 silent rows, and there is a scale in the center of the room. And the scroll in Ani's hands stops being a map here. It becomes a script, because in this hall, you're asked to account for your entire life. And the Book of the Dead now does something that should not make sense. It hands you your answers in advance. Spell 125. The most copied, most quoted, most important chapter in the whole tradition. Ani enters the hall and faces 42 assessor gods, 1 for every district of Egypt. Each has a name he must speak. Each is waiting to hear one specific sentence. The sentences survive. We can read all 42. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not made anyone weep. I have not tampered with the scales. Some are strangely specific, and the specific ones are the ones that stay with you. I have not held back the water in its season. I have not driven cattle from their pastures. I have not caught fish using fish of their own kind as bait. The one about the water is the one I can't get out of my head. In a country that lived and died by the flooding of one river, blocking water from your neighbor's field was an offense you would still be answering for after death. 1 denial per judge in order. Scholars call this the negative confession. It is the oldest itemized moral code we possess, older than the 10 Commandments by centuries. But look at it structurally for a second. It is not really a confession. A confession admits things. This denies things. 42 times with the exact wording supplied, in writing, ahead of time, inside a scroll you purchased while you were still alive. The exam comes with the answer key, and the text keeps going. It teaches Ani the secret names of the judges themselves, because the password mechanic never stops applying, not even in the courtroom. Address Farstrider, who came forth from Heliopolis correctly. Deny the right sin to the right God, and that judge is satisfied. 42 names, 42 denials, 0 improvisation. Then comes my favorite stretch of the entire spell, and very few summaries ever mention it. After the confession, when the judges are satisfied, Ani tries to leave the hall, and the room itself stops him. The parts of the door begin to speak. The bolt says, "I will not let you pass unless you tell me my name." The doorposts demand their names. The threshold demands its name. The floor refuses to be walked on. "I will not let you tread upon me," says the floor of the hall, "until you tell me my name." Piece by piece, the architecture interrogates the dead man, and the scroll supplies an answer for every single component. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to oversell this, and the text does not need any selling. A door that questions you, a floor that withholds permission. Whoever wrote this imagined a world where every object between you and safety is awake and suspicious and has to be answered. 3,000 years before anyone coined the phrase, the Egyptians invented two-factor authentication for the soul. So we have to ask the uncomfortable question, the one Egyptologists have politely argued about for 200 years. What kind of judgment is this, if the answers are for sale? A wealthy man with a good scribe walks in scripted. A poor man walks in with whatever he can remember. If passing depended on the script, the verdict was decided by what you could afford to be buried with. That is not justice. That is a toll booth, unless the recitation was never the real test. And the text itself, read closely, admits exactly that. Because while Ani stands there delivering his 42 perfect denials, something else is happening in the center of the room. Something he cannot script, cannot purchase, and cannot rehearse. The gods are not listening to his mouth. They are weighing his heart. And according to the Book of the Dead, your heart is not on your side. In the vignette, painted on Ani's own scroll, the scene is laid out like a procedure. On one pan of the scale, a heart. On the other, a single feather, the feather of Maat. Truth, order, the way things were on the first day. Anubis checks the balance. Thoth, the recorder, stands ready with his pen lifted, waiting to write the result down. The Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was where a life was stored. Every act, every intention, every lie, archived in the chest. The heart was the black box of a human being. These were the only embalmers in history who removed nearly every organ and deliberately left the heart inside the body. The record had to travel with you, and the record talks. This is the part of the religion almost nobody knows, and it is the part the Egyptians feared most. Spell 30b, one of the most widely used spells in the entire corpus, is addressed by the dead man to his own heart. Listen to the actual words. "O my heart of my mother, O my heart of my different forms, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not be hostile to me in the tribunal. Do not testify against me." Spoken to your own heart. And the Egyptians were so convinced the heart would do it anyway that they engineered a countermeasure. A heart scarab, a stone beetle carved with spell 30b, physically placed over the heart of the mummy. A paperweight on the witness. A gag order in granite for the one part of you that kept the true record. So now you can see what the Hall of Two Truths actually is. The names get you in the door. The recitation satisfies the judges. But the verdict comes from the scale, from the archive in your chest, weighed against truth itself. The 42 answers could be purchased. The reading on the scale could not. That is why the exam could afford to hand out the answer key. The confession was never the test. You were the test. The version of you that your own heart had been quietly writing down since the day you were born. And if the pans do not balance, if the heart comes up heavy. The text does not describe punishment. No fire, no torment. Beside the scale, in Ani's vignette, sits a creature the Egyptians assembled from the 3 deadliest animals they knew: crocodile head, lion forequarters, hippopotamus hindquarters. Her name is written right there on the papyrus. Amet, the devourer of the dead. She eats the heart, and the owner of that heart undergoes what the texts call, in plain words, 3,000 years before the Book of Revelation. Use the same phrase, the second death, not hell. Hell would mean you still exist. The second death is deletion. The archive is consumed, the name stops being spoken, and the person, every version of them, in every world, simply ends. The Egyptians built the most elaborate afterlife in human history, and at the very center of it they placed the one fate they considered worse than any suffering: erasure. But suppose you make it. The name spoken, the judges satisfied, the scale balanced. What exactly did the Egyptians think they were winning? The text answers that too, and the answer is stranger than any punishment. Spell 110 describes the destination: the field of reeds, and it is not clouds, and it is not light, and there are no wings anywhere. It is Egypt, a perfected copy of Egypt. The same river, flowing wider, the same fields, but the wheat grows taller than a man. The same boats, the same canals, the same harvest. Your family waiting. Eternity for the Egyptians looked exactly like home, with the volume of every good thing turned up. On Ani's scroll you can see him there in the final vignettes, plowing, harvesting, sailing, a dead accountant, farming forever, and painted as if there were nothing in existence. He wanted more. Then the practical Egyptian mind noticed a problem with its own paradise. If the afterlife is a working Egypt, then the afterlife has work. Canals need digging there too. Fields need plowing, and Egyptian authorities could summon you for labor duty in the next world exactly as they could in this one. Their solution might be the most honest thing any civilization has ever admitted about itself. Spell 6 of the Book of the Dead is a spell for making a servant statue work in your place. The Egyptians manufactured small figurines called shabtis, carved with that spell, and the text on them is wonderfully direct. When the dead man is called up for duty, the figurine is supposed to stand up and shout, "Here I am," a worker doll that answers the roll call so you don't have to. And they took no chances on the quantities. Tutankhamun was buried with 413 of them, 365 workers, one for every day of the year, plus 36 foremen, plus 12 overseers. An entire administrative staff with middle management packed into a tomb. Someone counted. Someone did the org chart for eternity. I love this detail because of what it reveals. These people were not vague about the afterlife. They budgeted for it. They staffed it. They solved labor disputes in it in advance with stone dolls. You do not do that for a metaphor. Every shabti and every museum case on Earth is a small physical vote of confidence that the field of reeds was a real place with a real economy. Which brings us to the question this channel exists to ask. How much of this, if any, should we take seriously? It is time to argue against ourselves. Mainstream Egyptology reads everything you have just heard as religious literature, and it has strong cards to play. The fill-in-the-name copies prove there was an industry, and industries sell comfort. The vignettes always show the deceased passing the judgment. Always. That is advertising, not reporting. The manual framing, scholars argue, is simply how ritual texts work. Second person, imperative, procedural, the grammar of liturgy. On most of this, the skeptics are right, and pretending otherwise would be selling you something this channel promised never to sell. But three things refuse to sit down. First, the convergence. 1,000 years before Ani's scroll was painted, Sumerian scribes wrote down the descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld. 7 gates. The traveler stripped of something at each one. A gatekeeper demanding credentials. 2,000 years after Ani, Tibetan monks compiled a book designed to be read aloud to the dying. Stage-by-stage navigation instructions for the first days after death. 3 traditions. No demonstrated contact. 1 architecture, staged passage, tested traveler, and knowledge as the difference between surviving death and dissolving in it. Coincidence is possible. Coincidence is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Second, the heart. Religions invent judges all the time. That part is ordinary. This text invented a hostile witness inside the believer and then sold the hardware to silence it. That is not a comfort product. Comfort products do not warn you that the most dangerous testimony at your trial will come from you. Third, the passage almost nobody quotes. Spell 175. Buried deep in the same funeral manual, there is a dialogue between Adam, the creator, and Osiris. And in it, Adam mentions calmly, in passing, the way you might mention a scheduled renovation, that one day he will destroy everything he made. The cities, the gods, the sky, the world, he says, will return to none. The primordial flood it rose from, and only he and Osiris will remain, surviving in the form of serpents, in the dark, where it all began. The end of the universe, filed inside a private citizen's guide to the afterlife, somewhere between a password list and an insurance policy. Why is it there? What does a dead accountant from Thebes need with the termination date of reality? Scholars call it a theological reflection on cosmic renewal, and maybe that is all it is. But notice what its presence implies. Whoever compiled this manual believed that the afterlife you fought so hard to reach, the fields, the gates, the hall, the wheat, taller than a man, was itself running on a timer. Even eternity in this book has an expiration date, and the text records that fact the same way it records everything else, precisely, procedurally, without any visible doubt that the information is true. The scroll is still there. 37 sheets behind glass in London, exactly where the tunnel under a storeroom wall in Luxor eventually delivered it. The colors have barely faded. The names of the gatekeepers are still legible. The 42 denials still read in order. The script died and came back, and after 3,000 years the manual is intact. The only thing missing is a way to test it. Maybe that is the real reason this document is so hard to look away from. We write about death the way people write about a wall. Grief on this side, hope painted on the other. The Egyptians wrote about it the way you write about a country you fully expect to enter. Border procedures, names of officials, phrases in the local language, what to say, what never to say, which forms your own heart might file against you. They kept this up for 1,500 years with a straight face, in their most expensive ink, and they stocked the luggage with staff. So you are left with 2 possibilities. Either an entire civilization spent 15 centuries drafting procedure for a place that does not exist, or the oldest research program in human history was pointed at exactly the right question, and we are the ones who stopped asking it. The real texts are stranger than anything anyone could make up. Ani's last vignette shows him walking out of the darkness into light. Coming forth by day, the book's true name and the outcome every page was built to produce. Whether it worked, his scroll cannot tell us. What it tells us is that he went in prepared, and Egypt was not the only place that briefed its dead. There is a book that describes who was watching Earth before the flood. The Bible removed it. That one is next. Today, we walk through what this text actually says in order. The 7 gates and the 3 beings posted at each one. The hall of 42 judges, where the exam comes with the answers already written. The scale, the creature waiting beside it. The strange reward on the far side, which almost nobody talks about. And at the very end, a few lines about how the world itself ends, hiding inside a personal funeral manual. One more thing. For 15 centuries, no one on Earth could read a word of this. That part of the story might be the best one if you want the books that never made the official list. Read for exactly what they say. Subscribe. That is what this channel does. Now, let's open it.